Toddler discovered a German shepherd guarding a duck nest. What happened next shocked everyone. What if I told you there's a story so powerful, it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the world? A story where a child's courage and a dog's loyalty create a bond that defies all odds. What happens next will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is one you won't want to miss. It was one of those afternoons that carried with it the warmth of peace, the kind of day small towns are known for. The lake lay still, its surface shimmering under the golden touch of the sun. Ducks drifted lazily across the water, leaving behind tiny ripples that spread in quiet circles. On the shore, the grass bent gently under the whisper of the breeze, and the distant creak of an old wooden swing echoed through the park. Everything about that moment spoke of calmness, of a world untouched by hurry. Among this peaceful scenery, a toddler played with the boundless joy only a child could bring. Her laughter bubbled like music, floating across the park, drawing smiles from those who happened to pass by. She chased after a butterfly, her tiny feet stumbling in the grass, her chubby fingers reaching out to capture a creature that was always one step ahead. Her mother sat on a bench nearby, watching with a soft smile, knowing that this innocent play was a memory being written, one of those fleeting but priceless snapshots of early childhood. But then, as the toddler's giggles faded for just a moment, her attention shifted. She froze, her head tilted in that curious way children often do when they sense something unusual. Her small hand, still clutching a bright red toy, lowered slowly as her wide eyes fixed on something in the distance. There, at the edge of the grass, sat a figure that did not belong to the peaceful pattern of the day. It was a German shepherd. Not running, not barking, not even moving. Just sitting. His tall frame was rigid, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, and his dark, watchful eyes never wavered from the ground beneath him. At first, it might have seemed like he was merely resting, perhaps waiting for someone. But the longer she stared, the stranger it became. He wasn't lying down as tired dogs usually would. He wasn't sniffing the air or wagging his tail. He was still, too still. The toddler took a hesitant step forward, her toy now forgotten in the grass. From her tiny perspective, the shepherd was both intimidating and fascinating. His pointed ears twitched when the breeze shifted, but otherwise he remained a silent statue, guarding something she could not yet see. Her little heart pounded with a mixture of wonder and unease. What was he doing there? Why did he look so serious, so focused, when the rest of the world seemed wrapped in tranquility? A duck quacked in the distance, breaking the silence, and the shepherd's body tensed slightly, as though responding to a call only he understood. The toddler's eyes widened even more. She wasn't afraid, not in the way adults might be when confronted with a large dog. Instead, she felt a pull, a sense that this moment meant something, though she couldn't explain what. Children have a way of seeing what adults often miss, of feeling truths hidden beneath the surface. And on that quiet afternoon, her innocence allowed her to see it. The shepherd was not just sitting there. He was protecting something. Her breath caught in her throat, and though she was too young to find the words, her gaze spoke the thought clearly. This dog is guarding. That day, her innocent eyes saw what no one else noticed. And as the story unfolded, it wouldn't just change her life, but it would change the way the entire town understood loyalty. Because sometimes, even in the quietest corners of the world, extraordinary stories are waiting, not written in books or shouted from stages, but silently unfolding in the devotion of a dog and in the heart of a child willing to see it. The small town park had always been a place where time seemed to move just a little slower. The old wooden benches, weathered by decades of sunshine and rain, stood like sentinels along the winding path. Their paint had long since faded, leaving behind only the bare wood, softened smooth by countless visitors who once sat there. lovers holding hands, grandmothers feeding crumbs to birds, old men playing checkers while the seasons turned around them. A cluster of willow trees leaned toward the pond, their long branches swaying gently in the breeze, brushing the surface of the water like tender fingers. Ducks glided across the calm pond, their feathers shimmering in the afternoon light, leaving soft ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. The air itself felt nostalgic, carrying with it the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the faint earthy scent of the pond. It was the kind of day that grandparents often recalled when speaking of simpler times, a world free from the rush of traffic and the buzzing of phones. Here, in this park, the sound that ruled was not noise but life itself, the laughter of children, the gentle quacking of ducks, the creak of a swing swaying under a child's weight. Among this serenity, a baby girl played with a joy so pure that it seemed to paint the entire park with innocence. She was still at that age where every discovery, no matter how small, felt like a treasure. A dandelion puff in the grass was a tiny miracle. A butterfly fluttering past was a chase worth tumbling for. Her giggles echoed like bells, bouncing off the benches and trees, drawing smiles from passers-by. She wore a little yellow dress, bright against the green of the grass, and in her chubby hands she clutched a small wooden toy, a gift from her grandfather who had carved it long ago with patient hands. Her mother sat nearby on one of the old benches, a quiet guardian of this small world of wonder. She watched with loving eyes as her daughter toddled back and forth, sometimes wobbling as she bent to pick up a flower, sometimes squealing as she tried to catch the shadow of a bird overhead. For her mother, these afternoons were a kind of blessing, a chance to pause, to breathe, and to watch childhood unfold in its most natural, beautiful form. The ducks in the pond quacked as though joining in the child's laughter, waddling to the shore in hopes of scraps. The little girl clapped her hands, delighted by their waddling movements, and threw a few crumbs from the crackers she had clutched in her pocket. Life was ordinary in the most extraordinary way, painted in simple joys that so often go unnoticed until they are gone. Yet amid this calm, something quietly unusual stirred. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the grass, where the willow branches hung low. The toddler paused, crumbs still in her hand, and tilted her head in curiosity. Her eyes, wide and unclouded by doubt or distraction, noticed what others had missed. There, a short distance away, sat a German shepherd. He was large and imposing, his strong frame unmistakable even from afar. But what struck the toddler most was not his size, nor even his sharp, pointed ears that twitched now and then. It was the stillness. He was sitting perfectly upright, his gaze locked on something near the ground. His body was alert, every muscle seeming ready yet strangely unmoving, as though he had rooted himself in that spot with an invisible purpose. The little girl blinked, her toy dropping silently to the grass. She took a step forward, her heart a mix of curiosity and wonder. There was something different about this dog. Unlike the playful pets she had seen before, this one did not wag his tail or bark for attention. He didn't chase the ducks or sniff the air. His eyes remained fixed, unblinking, on a small patch of grass before him. Her mother followed her gaze and frowned faintly. At a glance, it seemed harmless enough. A dog resting, perhaps waiting for its owner. But to the toddler, the air shifted. Children have a way of sensing significance where adults dismiss it, of catching subtleties that slip past older eyes dulled by habit. The girl felt it in her small chest. This wasn't an ordinary moment. She crouched low, her little hands pressing into the grass for balance, her eyes never leaving the shepherd. The sunlight caught the dog's fur, glinting off his strong frame, yet his posture carried no aggression. It was not the stance of a predator ready to strike. No, it was something quieter, something weightier, a stillness that spoke of intention. The ducks, too, seemed aware. Instead of scattering in fear, They lingered nearby, waddling along the edge of the pond as though they trusted him. The willow branches swayed above, casting dappled shadows across the scene, while the toddler's innocent eyes searched for answers. Her mother called her name softly, perhaps sensing her daughter's fascination stretching into something more serious. But the girl didn't move. She was caught, mesmerized by the sight of a noble creature behaving in a way she didn't yet understand. To anyone else, it was just a dog sitting at the park. But to the little girl, the shepherd's behavior was odd, different, almost as if he were a sentinel guarding something unseen. And though she couldn't yet know it, that small spark of curiosity in her innocent heart would soon unravel a story that would ripple through the entire town. A story of loyalty, devotion, and the surprising ways love reveals itself. The toddler's small feet carried her closer, one cautious step after another. Her mother called gently from behind, telling her to stay near, but the child's curiosity had already taken hold. There was something magnetic about the shepherd's presence, something unspoken that drew her forward. She moved with the fearless innocence only a child could possess, clutching nothing now, her toy and crackers forgotten in the grass behind her. The German shepherd remained still, his ears twitching as the girl's footsteps crunched softly on the grass. His chest rose and fell with slow, measured breaths, but he didn't turn his head toward her. Instead, his gaze stayed fixed on the ground just beneath him, unwavering, as though whatever lay there demanded all of his being. When the toddler drew close enough, her tiny eyes widened with wonder. Nestled in the shadow of the shepherd's strong frame was a fragile mound of grass and twigs, a duck's nest. And inside, glistening under the dappled light, were delicate eggs, their pale shells almost glowing with vulnerability. The shepherd's tail had curled protectively around the nest, forming a partial shield against the world. His massive body loomed above, a living fortress ensuring that no harm would come to what he guarded. The toddler gasped softly, her little hand flying to her mouth, as if she instinctively understood the sacredness of what she had discovered. For a moment, she simply stared. A large dog, often seen as fierce or intimidating, was here transformed into something altogether different, a sentinel of gentleness. He shifted slightly, his paw inching forward so that it almost touched the nest, and then, when a breeze stirred the grass, he lowered his head, placing his muzzle close as though to reassure the fragile lives beneath him. The girl felt her heart flutter in amazement. She didn't know why this dog was here or why he cared so deeply for the eggs, but what she saw etched itself into her memory, the raw, unspoken devotion of a creature often misunderstood. Just then, a couple of passers-by noticed the child near the shepherd and froze. One of them whispered sharply, warning her mother to pull the toddler back. "That dog could be dangerous," they murmured. But the child did not flinch. She saw something no one else did. The shepherd's eyes, though sharp, were not cruel. His growl was low, soft, almost a warning not to others but a reassurance to what he protected. "Stay safe, I am here." Her mother's heart raced as she hurried closer, but even she slowed when she saw what lay beneath the shepherd. The sight was shocking, yes, but not in the way one expected. It was not danger that stopped her breath. It was the strange, unlikely tenderness of it all. The toddler, sensing her mother's hesitation, crouched down in the grass a few feet away. Her tiny fingers brushed against the earth as she leaned forward, her eyes glowing with curiosity and compassion. The dog's ears twitched at her movement, and for a heartbeat, tension filled the air. But instead of lunging or snarling, the shepherd exhaled slowly, as though acknowledging her presence, as though he, too, recognized the purity in her. The little girl tilted her head and whispered in the simplest, softest voice, "Baby." She didn't know what else to call him, but the word carried no fear, only a child's instinctive kindness. The shepherd blinked once, then lowered his head even closer to the nest, resting his chin on his paws. The toddler's eyes sparkled. She felt it, the connection, the truth. This dog was not a threat. He was a guardian. Her mother, though still cautious, watched in awe as the moment unfolded. The contrast was almost too much to absorb. A powerful animal, feared by many, choosing to dedicate himself to the protection of something as fragile as duck eggs. The toddler, too young to grasp the weight of it all, simply smiled, her heart swelling with something she didn't have words for. The passers-by shook their heads, muttering doubts. "It's dangerous, dogs don't act this way." But the little girl wasn't listening. She leaned closer, her small hands pressing into the grass, her eyes locked on the shepherd's steady gaze. And in that instant, the story took on its shape. Because where adults saw risk, where they braced for trouble, the child saw the truth. Her innocence cut through the fear, painting the moment in its purest form. Where adults saw danger, the toddler saw devotion. The German shepherd shifted again, curling himself more tightly around the nest as though declaring silently, "These lives are mine to guard." The little girl nodded, her lips curling into a smile of understanding. To her, it was simple. The dog loved them. Her mother, caught between worry and awe, finally crouched down beside her daughter, resting a hand on her tiny shoulder. She, too, couldn't deny the quiet power of what she was seeing. The world was full of cruelty and indifference. Yet here, in this unassuming patch of grass, a story of loyalty and tenderness had chosen to unfold. And though the toddler could not articulate it, she felt it deeply. This was no ordinary afternoon. This was something that would stay with her forever, something that would ripple outward through everyone who came to witness it. For in the stillness of that shepherd, guarding not his own kind but something entirely different, was a lesson that even the wisest among them might have missed. A reminder that devotion knows no boundaries, that love, in its truest form, protects without question. The toddler giggled softly, her fear entirely replaced by warmth. The shepherd's ear twitched at the sound, and though he did not move, something in his eyes softened, as though he, too, understood that in her innocence, she had already accepted his purpose. And in that moment, under the gentle sway of the willows, the story truly began. Her mother finally found her voice and reached for her phone, hands trembling as she tried to make sense of what her daughter had discovered. The toddler, breathless with urgency, tugged at her sleeve and pointed again and again to the spot where the German shepherd lay like a living shield. "Doggy guarding babies," she insisted, the words round and certain in a way that made the mother's heartbeat change tempo. "Guarding ducks." Her mother frowned, as if the idea itself were a loose thread tugging at the edges of reality. "Sweetheart, dogs don't." She stopped, because the shepherd hadn't moved, not even to acknowledge the cluster of voices beginning to gather. A jogger slowed, a couple with a stroller veered close, two teenagers on bikes braked hard along the path. In small towns, a mystery is louder than any siren. The news moved across the park like a ripple across still water. Within minutes there were a dozen onlookers, each with a different explanation, each sure of the world as they knew it. "A dog guarding ducks?" "Impossible," one man said, folding his arms, deciding the matter with the weight of his voice. "Maybe he's hunting them," a woman offered, anxious eyes darting toward the nest. "Shouldn't we call animal control?" "Don't get too close," another warned, as though the shepherd were a tripwire. "That breed can be intense." The toddler stepped closer to her mother, her small hand threading into a familiar palm, but her gaze never wavered from the dog. In her mind, there was no confusion to sort through. She had already chosen the simplest truth and wrapped her faith around it. The shepherd was not a threat. The shepherd was a promise that no harm would cross that small ring of grass and twigs. A groundskeeper who knew every maple by its scars and every goose by its attitude came jogging over, keys chiming on his belt. "What's all this now?" he asked, breath puffing in the cool air. He slowed when he saw the tension in the group, and then saw the nest, the eggs, the huge dark shape curled like a question mark around them. He squatted low, not too near, his eyes narrowing as he studied the scene like a puzzle. "Huh," he said, which for a man of few words was an entire paragraph. "Not something you see every day." The toddler's mother tried to explain, but the explanations kept contradicting themselves. Why was the dog here at all? If he meant harm, why hadn't he struck? If he was wild or lost, why did he seem so purposeful? "Where's the mother duck?" someone asked, and the question stuck to the air, heavy, unanswerable. It was then that the oddness sharpened, the picture clicking into focus with details that hadn't yet found their way to language. A smudge of down caught on a reed. A feather, clean and perfect, pinned to the grass by a drop of dew. In a muddy patch near the edge of the pond, prints. Not webbed, not delicate. Something else. Longer, narrower, the story of a quick step and a quicker retreat. Fox, perhaps. Food. Trouble written in clay. And still the German shepherd did not move. He didn't pant, though the sun pressed its hand against his back. He didn't beg, though a boy with cracker crumbs on his shirt stood close enough to toss one. He didn't look away, not even when the toddler whispered, "Hi," like a secret between friends. His body was a line drawn in the sand. His eyes were a lighthouse beam that never blinked. "Could be the duck bolted," the groundskeeper said softly, as if not to disturb an invisible thread. "Sometimes they panic. Sometimes they don't come back." He shifted his weight, studying the dog. "But why is he sitting there like that?" A woman dialed animal control. Someone else texted the volunteer rescue group that once fetched an injured swan from a storm drain. A teen filmed from a careful distance, the shaky footage turning the shepherd into a myth in real time. The town was now properly involved. It threw theories like bread to fish. "He's injured," said one. "He's trained," said another. "He's waiting," the toddler said, and the single word, soft as it was, turned heads. Waiting, yes, that was the shape of it. Waiting like a clock that had chosen a single moment and refused to let it pass. Her mother knelt to her level. "Waiting for what, honey?" "For the babies to be okay," the toddler answered, as if it were obvious. As if this were how the world worked, if only you looked at it the right way. Doubt is a stubborn thing, but innocence is heavier. The mother's skepticism loosened its grip. She took a slow breath, then glanced at the groundskeeper. "Let's keep people back," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Give him space." A gentle border formed. A ring of caution cones borrowed from a maintenance cart, a loose line of neighbors who agreed to become a fence. The shepherd acknowledged none of it. The only boundary he trusted was his own. "I don't see a collar," someone observed, leaning on the authority of nearsightedness. Another swore they glimpsed leather pressed flat beneath fur, a ghost of a tag gone missing. Mystery was now a second creature crouched in the grass. They tried offering water in a shallow lid. The shepherd didn't drink. They slid a dish closer. He didn't blink. The toddler's mother murmured to him, the way you do with shy animals in skittish mornings, and the dog flicked an ear, no more. He had redefined the word still until it meant willing to be a statue so life can go on behind you. Maybe he chased something off, the groundskeeper mused, nodding toward the paw prints by the reeds. Maybe he's been here since. "Since when?" a teen asked. "Since the fox came," the toddler said, pointing solemnly at the clay marks. She didn't know the name of what had stalked the shore, but she knew its shape, its intent. Her mother looked at her, really looked, and saw a child who wasn't guessing. She was reading the world like it was written in letters only she remembered how to sound out. By then, more faces had appeared. The baker who always added an extra roll if he liked your story, the retired teacher who still carried a whistle out of habit, the nurse who walked the loop twice every lunch break and greeted the geese by rank and serial number. They formed a small half-moon of worry and wonder. "Should we move him?" the nurse asked, scanning the shepherd's flank for signs of stress. "He could be dehydrated." "If we push him, he could panic," the groundskeeper said. "Or worse, he leaves and then what?" "Then the eggs are alone," the toddler answered, a soft verdict that no one wanted to challenge. So they waited, people and shadows and theories, and the shepherd waited in a different way, the way a bridge waits for footsteps. The willow above them stirred and settled. Somewhere beyond the curve of the pond, a mallard called and was answered, but the familiar quacking that should have stitched this particular story together did not come. The mother duck was the missing line in a poem everyone instinctively knew by heart. It was strange, then, that the scene remained whole, because the dog had stepped into the blank space and made himself a stanza. As minutes stretched into an hour, a new kind of hush began to fall, a hush not of fear, but of recognition. The shape of the shepherd around those eggs started to look like something more than strangeness. It began to look like a truth people had long suspected but rarely seen, that guardianship comes from the heart, not the handbook, that some vows are made without language, that the world sometimes appoints its protectors in ways that make no sense until you feel them breathing. The toddler leaned her cheek against her mother's shoulder, eyes never leaving the nest. "He's a good dog," she whispered. "He is," her mother answered. And this time there was no doubt, only a quiet awe that softened the sharp corners of the day. Behind them, the town continued to assemble, disbelief wearing down into curiosity, curiosity weathering into care. Someone brought a big umbrella and held it high to cast shade over dog and eggs. The groundskeeper repositioned the cones. The teenagers swapped filming for fetching and came back with bottled water and a clean towel, which no one needed, and that mattered too, somehow. Still, no sign of the duck. Still, the paw prints by the reed bed, a breadcrumb trail of fear. And still, the shepherd, who had decided that stillness could be an action verb. The toddler, who understood the simple math of devotion, smiled through the kind of fatigue that makes children wiser. She didn't know phrases like metaphor or unseen guardianship. But if she had, she might have said this: the dog's body was a roof, and the eggs were the house, and love was the reason a roof keeps standing even when the storm has already passed. The groundskeeper finally straightened, rubbing his knees. "We'll keep watch," he said, "till animal rescue gets here, till we figure out the rest." The mother nodded, the toddler nodded, the town nodded, and the shepherd, who had never been asked, gave his answer the only way he knew, by staying. The sun had begun its slow descent, staining the edges of the willow leaves gold. Hours had passed, and still the German shepherd hadn't moved from his post. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of patience, though now his breaths were slower, heavier, as though each one carried the weight of his duty. The toddler's parents, who had stayed at a respectful distance, could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. Their little girl tugged insistently at their hands, her eyes brimming with conviction. "He's a good dog," she repeated, the phrase so simple and yet carrying a stubborn weight that no adult logic could shake. Her father frowned, glancing toward the nest, then at the shepherd. "Sweetheart, he's still an animal. He could be dangerous." But the child shook her head firmly, curls bouncing as she looked back at the shepherd. "No, he's family to them." She pointed to the fragile eggs beneath the dog's watchful frame, as though the statement was obvious, as though she were explaining the alphabet to someone who had forgotten it. The mother, torn between caution and curiosity, finally took a slow step forward. Her shoes crunched against the gravel, a sound that made the shepherd's ear twitch. His head lifted, amber eyes flicking toward her, sharp and alert. The father reached instinctively for his wife's arm, pulling her back, but she raised her hand in reassurance. "Easy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words were meant for herself or the dog. The shepherd gave a low sound, not a growl, not quite, more like the echo of determination, a soft reminder of his claim. His gaze didn't waver. He was ready, if he had to be, to defend the fragile life under his care. But then something unexpected happened. The toddler wriggled free from her father's grasp and toddled closer, her little shoes pattering softly across the grass. Gasps rose from the gathered neighbors. Someone hissed, "Pull her back." But the parents froze, torn between instinct and the strange trust they saw in their child's face. She stopped just a few feet away from the shepherd, crouching low the way only children know how, without fear, without hesitation. Her tiny hand, round and soft, reached out to the grass in front of her, palm down, resting lightly on the earth. Not touching the dog, not intruding, just there, open and present. The shepherd's eyes locked on hers. For one tense moment, silence weighed on every witness like a heavy blanket. The dog's ears stiffened. His body seemed to tighten, coiled with decision. But then, as if her innocence had traveled across the space between them, something inside him shifted. His rigid stance softened ever so slightly. He exhaled, a long, weary breath, and lowered his head back toward the nest. The toddler smiled. "See? He knows," she whispered. Her parents could only stare in disbelief. The crowd murmured in awe, the sharp edge of fear dulled into wonder. Somehow, this small child had accomplished what no amount of coaxing or logic could do. She had bridged the silence between species, replacing suspicion with recognition. But with wonder came questions, and those questions scratched at the edges of the moment like shadows trying to get in. Why was this dog here? Who had left him? If he belonged to someone, why wasn't anyone looking for him? And why, of all things, had he chosen to guard a duck's nest? The groundskeeper shook his head. "He's hungry, that much is plain. Look at him, he hasn't left that spot in who knows how long. But he's not budging. Not for food, not for people. It's like he's sworn an oath." The nurse who'd come earlier folded her arms, eyes troubled. Dogs don't do this without reason. Something happened. Indeed, the shepherd's body bore signs of hardship. His ribs showed faintly beneath his coat. His paws were crusted with mud, as if he had been wandering for days. Yet there he remained, tethered by some invisible bond to the fragile shells beneath him. The toddler's father muttered, "It doesn't make sense." But his daughter looked up at him with clear eyes. "It doesn't have to," she said softly, as though echoing a wisdom far beyond her years. The suspense thickened. What force had guided the shepherd here? Was it chance, fate, or some story still hidden in the shadows? Each person present could feel it. The scene was incomplete, the truth waiting like a note at the bottom of a well. The little girl inched closer still, placing her hand once again on the grass. This time, her fingertips brushed against the shepherd's paw, just the slightest touch. Gasps rippled through the crowd, her parents stiffened, but the dog didn't snap, didn't growl. Instead, his paw relaxed beneath the weight of her touch. His shoulders, tense for so long, loosened as though he had finally been given permission to rest, if only for a moment. Her mother covered her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. "Oh my God!" The toddler leaned forward and whispered, barely audible, "You're not alone." It was a moment that defied explanation. The shepherd blinked, slowly, deliberately, and then lowered his head beside his paw, his chin touching the ground just inches from her small fingers. The town collectively exhaled. The struggle was not over. The dog was weary, hungry, carrying secrets that no one could yet name. But in that instant, faith replaced fear. The child's faith in him had been enough to unlock something dormant, something deeper than instinct. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some still skeptical, some already moved to tears. But for the toddler, the truth was clear as daylight. She had seen loyalty where others had seen danger. She had touched devotion where others feared claws and teeth. The German Shepherd had passed his first test, not of strength, but of trust. And as the shadows lengthened across the park, the mystery only deepened. Who was he waiting for? Why had he chosen this nest? And how long could he hold his silent vigil before his own body gave out? No one yet knew the answers. But in the eyes of one child, those answers didn't matter, not yet. What mattered was simple, that the eggs were safe tonight, because someone had chosen to love them. By late afternoon the park had grown hushed, as if the willows themselves were holding their breath. News travels quickly in small towns, and this news, of a German shepherd guarding a duck's nest, moved faster than the breeze. First came the groundskeeper with orange cones and a roll of thin rope. Then the nurse returned with bottled water and 2 towels. Finally, a white van eased along the gravel path. The local animal rescue, its logo, a blue paw, flashed on the door. A veterinarian climbed out with a canvas kit, followed by 2 volunteers carrying portable fencing, a collapsible crate, and a shallow dish. The shepherd didn't flinch until the metal of the fence clicked in volunteer hands. His head lifted. His body rose an inch higher over the eggs. A sound rumbled low in his chest, not threat so much as warning. Careful. Lives are here. Easy, boy, the vet murmured, kneeling side on to show no challenge. She removed her cap, slid it into her pocket, and set her kit on the grass without opening it. We're here to help your family, not take them. The word family seemed to land like a soft blanket. The dog's ears twitched, but his gaze stayed hard. The toddler wriggled free from her father again, small shoes whispering through clover. No one stopped her this time. They had seen what her presence could do. She sank to her usual spot, a respectful arm's length away, and pressed her tiny palm into the grass near his paw. "It's okay," she breathed, voice thin as silk. "They're good people." The shepherd's eyes flicked to her, then to the vet. His chest loosened. The warning sound dissolved into a long, exhausted sigh. "May I check you, friend?" the vet asked softly, keeping her voice like dusk. She slid a flexible stethoscope from her bag, not the cold metal bell but a rubbery disc warmed in her palm. The shepherd watched. The toddler nodded once, solemn as a host granting permission in a sacred place. The vet moved centimeter by centimeter. She didn't reach for his head, or his back, or his tail. She set the stethoscope just behind his foreleg, near enough to hear the heart, far enough to leave his shield over the nest. Lubed up, too fast. She touched his gums gently with a finger, pale, tacky. "Dehydrated," she mouthed to the volunteers, one-handed over a shallow dish. Instead of pushing it toward him, the toddler took it with both hands. "For you," she whispered, sliding it to the edge of his paw. He didn't break posture, but he bent his neck, tongue dipping once, twice. Quick sips a sentry might steal between scans of the horizon. "Good boy," the vet said, barely audible. "You're doing something remarkable." A chorus of small clicks sounded beneath him. At first no one registered it. Not the parents, not the volunteers, not even the vet. The shepherd felt it. His ears pricked forward sharply. The toddler cocked her head. The sound came again, a delicate tapping, like fingernails on a teacup. The eggs were moving. "There," the nurse gasped, pointing with a trembling hand. One shell rocked, then another, trembling with patient insistence. A hairline crack zigzagged across the chalky surface. "They're hatching," the groundskeeper whispered, tearing up. "Good Lord, they're actually hatching." The vet's training pulled her into stillness. "No one touch the nest," she cautioned, palms down. "If the mother returns, she must find things as they are. And if she doesn't," She glanced at the shepherd, then at the toddler. Somehow that sentence didn't need finishing. The shepherd adjusted his posture with astonishing care. He didn't stand. He didn't shift his weight abruptly. He widened his front paws by a hand's breadth and curled his tail closer, making a living wall on 3 sides of the nest and leaving the 4th open to air. His breath grew shallower, slower, as though he feared the rise and fall might disturb a miracle. Tap tap. A pale triangle punctured one shell, a wet beak thrusting, retreating, thrusting again. A soft whimper rose from the shepherd, almost a prayer. The toddler's eyes filled and spilled. "You can do it," she whispered, the words floating like feathers. The vet leaned near, not to interfere but to watch the rhythm. Push, rest, push. "They're strong," she breathed. "They're on time." The first duckling burst free, a tumble of damp down and determination. It blinked, stunned by its own success, then peeped, tinny, brave. The sound ricocheted through the ring of neighbors and returned to the nest as a hush. The duckling tottered forward and met a wall of tawny fur. It hesitated, then pressed its tiny body against the shepherd's warm ruff as if that warmth were the only constant in a world that had begun with a crack. The shepherd did not move. A second shell broke. Then a third. Each time, the dog's breath fluttered. Each time, he anchored himself deeper, a lighthouse promising the sea that light would not go out. The toddler giggled through tears. "They think he's their mountain," she said, because to a child the right metaphors arrive like swallows. Phones appeared at the edges of the crowd, but someone hissed, "No flash," and for once everyone listened. The volunteers unrolled their low fencing, staking it in a wide arc not to cage but to warn. The groundskeeper hammered a quick sign into the soil. "Caution, nesting wildlife, please keep distance." The park, so often the stage for joggers and picnics and birthday bubbles, had become a chapel. The vet worked in that sanctuary's nave without disturbing the altar. She slid a small bowl of diluted electrolyte solution closer to the shepherd's paw, set a smear of soft food within reach, and withdrew. "Eat if you can," she murmured. "They need you steady." He took one bite, then stopped, the kind of self-denial that is not stubbornness but love. "May I?" the toddler asked the vet, not with words so much as with eyes. The vet nodded. The child scooped a fingerful of water and touched it to the shepherd's lips as though anointing him. He licked her fingertip once and drank, a little more this time. For ducklings now, huddled beneath the curve of his chest, peeping a chorus like tiny bells. One egg rocked on its side, struggling longer than the rest. The toddler leaned close but stopped short of shadowing the shell. "It's okay," she breathed, steady as the tide. "We're here." The shell split poorly, a corner clinging. The vet tensed. "Sometimes they need rest between tries," she said to the air, to the worried faces. "We don't help unless they're failing." The shepherd lowered his head until his nose hovered above the stubborn egg, warm air bathing the crack. He did not touch it. He only lent it weather, a microclimate of patience. The last duckling spilled free in a heap of wet light. The toddler clapped a single delighted clap before remembering this church's etiquette and pressing her hands to her mouth. The shepherd exhaled a long, trembling breath, and the crowd breathed with him. Somewhere beyond the willow fringe, a quack sounded, distant, questioning. Heads turned. Another quack, closer now. The vet's eyes widened. "Mama," she whispered. "She's coming." They did not know where she had gone in the hours, or days, before, only that absence can be an act of survival too. The shepherd's ears swiveled toward the sound, then back to his charges. He didn't abandon them, didn't rush to meet the familiar voice. He waited, still the bivouac, until a mallard burst into view, feathers slick with pond light, eyes sharp with urgency. The mother duck halted at the fence, head bobbing, scanning the circle of humans, the wall of dog, the quivering heap of newborns. The shepherd shifted, slow as sunrise, making space. The mallard slipped under the lowest rail, skittered to the nest, and began the ancient, efficient work of gathering her young beneath her belly and wings. It was then, only then, that the shepherd allowed himself to fold. Not away, not out, but down, placing his chin on the grass so the toddler's hand could find his paw again. The vet crouched beside him, stethoscope returning to its place behind his foreleg. The heartbeat was steadier now. "You did it," she said, and there was reverence in it. "You kept your promise." The toddler leaned in, cheek nearly touching his fur. "They're safe," she told him, as if delivering the very words he needed to stand down. "You can rest." He closed his eyes, not in sleep, not yet, but in that first, fragile permission to set the burden down because others had picked it up. Around them the volunteers reinforced the fence, the neighbors wiped their faces, the groundskeeper phoned the city to report a protected nest. The nurse draped one towel over the shepherd's back to keep the evening chill at bay and tucked the other beneath his paw so the earth would feel less hard. 5 ducklings peeped from the mother's wings, faces bright as coins. The shepherd's tail gave one soft thump in the clover, and you could feel it. The exact second the park fell in love with a dog who had taught it what guardianship looks like. Twilight lapped at the shore. The vet spoke quietly to the parents. He needed fluids, food, a safe place to recover after the family reunification was complete. The rescue team would coordinate. The town would take turns sitting the night watch. No one would leave the nest alone again. But the turning point had already happened, and everyone there knew it. It wasn't when the sirenless van arrived or when the cones circled the grass. It was when a child's whisper bridged a wary heart to human hands, when a dog, parched and shaking, decided to trust, when 5 lives cracked their way into light under the shelter of a creature who owed them nothing and chose them anyway. That evening, when the last of the cones were staked and the willow shadows had gone long and blue, the vet crouched beside the German shepherd and said, "You kept watch. Now let us keep watch over you." The town agreed with 100 tiny nods. He was too worn to stay by the lakeside through the night, and the nest, reunited with its mother, was ringed with fence and human promises. So the parents offered what everyone secretly hoped would happen: "Come home with us tonight, friend. Just for a while. Until you're strong." The shepherd stood on unsteady legs and looked to the tiniest member of the crowd for permission. She answered the way she always had, with her hand, small and steady, slipping into the space by his paw. He followed her to the car as if she were a lantern in fog. At the house, they made a bed from old quilts and a bath towel that smelled like sun. The vet had sent them home with a paper sack, antibiotics, a bottle of electrolyte mix, instructions scribbled in quick loops. The shepherd drank carefully, then lowered his body onto the quilts with a sigh that pulled the day closed like a curtain. The baby girl toddled over with her favorite knitted blanket, the one with a loose thread she always worried between her fingers, and draped it across his shoulders with a gravity that made her parents swallow hard. "Keep her," she said, first a whisper, then, pleased with the sound again, "Keep her." The name fit in the room the way a heartbeat fits in a chest. By morning, word had spread in that miraculous way small-town news travels. Not as gossip, but as provision. A grocery bag appeared on their porch with canned food for large breed dogs and a note that read, "For the hero at the lake. No onions, no grapes, we Googled." The feed store owner called to say he had a surplus of joint chews if the dog needed them. A retired carpenter offered to build a proper gate for the backyard. Someone from the city emailed a PDF of wildlife-friendly practices, like it was a medal. And the nurse from the park texted a picture, 5 downy ducklings tucked beneath a mother's wing, a caption of 3 words, "All present, thriving." Keeper began to knit himself into the house in ways only a dog can. He learned the hollow thump of the father's boots at 5, the kettle's whispered whistle at 6, the cartoon theme song that meant the baby girl would settle cross-legged on the rug with a bowl of dry cereal to share. He didn't beg. There was a gravity in him that felt like manners. But when the toddler held out one Cheerio, he accepted it with the delicacy of a monk receiving communion. Pain moved through him like weather. You could see it when he rose. A stiff hitch in the first 2 steps, the ghost of old labor in his hips. The vet checked him again, praised the clean gums and stronger pulse, palpated a scar behind his ear as if it were an old story she was learning to read. "You'll keep the activity gentle," she told the family. "Short walks, longer naps, no stairs, lots of water." The dog heard only the cadence of kindness and took it like medicine. Every afternoon, the mother took the stroller to the park path and Keeper padded alongside. Not quite heel, not quite free, the leash loose as a ribbon between them. When they reached the willow fringe, he would slow. He would look, not tug, never intrude, only look, until the toddler pointed and said, "Duck babies." On the water, the small flotilla skated across a pane of light, the mother duck's wake sketching a silver arrowhead. Keeper watched, head tilted as if counting. When a duckling lagged, he leaned an inch forward. When it caught up, his tail made a single, satisfied tap. By week's end, the story had become the town's favorite refrain. In the bakery line, someone would murmur, "Did you hear?" He stayed all night, and someone else would answer, "He waited for them to hatch," as though quoting scripture. Donations filled a jar by the register. For Keeper's vet bills scrawled on the label in marker, and when the jar overflowed, the baker taped a second note underneath, "Excess goes to the rescue." A high school art student left a chalk drawing on the park path. A big gentle dog with 5 tiny yellow ovals tucked under his chest. The rain washed it away the next day, and somehow that felt right too. The story had already moved off the pavement and into people. The baby girl and the shepherd became a matched set. If she wandered room to room dragging a wooden duck on a string, he followed, making a soft huff whenever the toy snagged on a chair leg. If she napped, he curled at the threshold like a bookend. At bath time, he kept his nose near the lip of the tub, more lifeguard than spectator. When she woke from a dream with a cry, always the same one, sharp and surprised, his head shot up before her parents and he sent a low, soothing sound into the dark, a lullaby that didn't need melody. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, the father knelt and tested words like keys in a lock. "Sit." Keeper sat, though the motion cost him. "Stay." Keeper stilled, a statue with breath. "Leave it." He turned his head from the dropped treat and looked to the man for the next right thing. "Who taught you that?" the father asked the air. Keeper didn't answer, but the way his ears flicked toward the window told a piece of the truth. Learning like this doesn't come from commands alone. It comes from a life where listening has always mattered. The fuller answer arrived 2 Saturdays later in the form of a bell above the feed store door and the smell of alfalfa bales. The mother had brought Keeper in for more food and the joint chews they'd been promised. The owner, Mr. Sloan, squinted over his glasses as the shepherd crossed the threshold. Then his face changed in the way faces do when memory walks in after a long absence. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, "if that isn't Eli Hart's dog." He came around the counter slowly, one palm open, like this was a reunion not only of species but of decades. "You remember Eli?" he asked the mother, who shook her head. "Old farmer out by the North Marsh. Raised runner ducks. Man talked to them like they were co-workers." Mr. Sloan crouched and scratched the exact patch behind Keeper's ear that the vet had lingered on. Eli called him Harbor. Said he was where the little ones learned to land. Keeper's eyes softened, and he leaned a fraction into the touch, as if confirming a name rather than preferring it. Mr. Sloan told the rest in low, careful pieces. Eli had passed in early winter. The farm sold. Fences came down. The pond went still. We looked for the dog. Thought maybe family took him. Or maybe he drifted. He shook his head. Guess he drifted toward work he recognized. The mother swallowed around something that wasn't a lump so much as an invitation to reverence. In her mind, she saw a man with hands roughened by twine and weather, teaching a young shepherd the geometry of geese, the slow patience of brooders, the shape of danger in the grass. She saw winter closing a door no dog could understand. She saw a park's pond calling like an old song. Arbor, keeper. Two names that were really the same job. Back at the lake, the ducklings fattened into their verbs. Preen, dabble, dive. The mother led them in tidy parades across the park's shallows, and the town made room for their crossings. Cars idled. Children sat on the curb and counted aloud. The groundskeeper added one more sign to the fence. A simple silhouette of a shepherd and 5 ovals beneath him. Thank you, guardian. Keeper, harbor to the past, keeper to the child, began to put on the weight that isn't just meat but peace. His coat glowed where it had dulled. His eyes lost that embered flicker of exhaustion. He learned where the kitchen sunshine landed at 10 in the morning and claimed that square politely. He discovered that the baby girl's stuffed duck quacked if you squeezed it, and when it squawked in the night under her arm, he trotted in from the hall, nuzzled the toy once, and set it still. Sometimes the 3 of them stood at the park's edge, mother, daughter, dog, watching the little fleet cut tiny verses on the water. And sometimes an older man or woman would pause beside them, palms tucked into coat pockets, voice soft with a kind of wonder that had very little to do with birds. I raised ducks when I was young, one said. Never saw anything like that shepherd. Another, Eli would have been proud. And the mother found herself agreeing with both, and with something she couldn't put into words, that this dog had carried a piece of someone's good work through winter and brought it back to where it could do some good in the spring. They never made Keeper choose between names. Harbor was the story that explained his first loyalty. Keeper was the promise he kept now. The baby girl called whichever came to her tongue in the moment, then added her own syllable on top like a ribbon. He, she sang, and he came, not because of the sound but because of the bond underneath it. On the first morning the ducklings took the long route all the way around the pond and back again. The town clapped from the benches like parents at a kindergarten play. Keeper didn't bark, he didn't prance. He simply watched until the last small body cleared the reed line and vanished into the shade at their mother's heels. Then he sat, closed his eyes for one beat, and let his tail thump once. Approval, and the quiet relief of a job that never asked for applause and somehow received it anyway. The story of the German shepherd and the fragile duck nest did not end when the ducklings grew their feathers or when the town returned to its everyday rhythm. No, like ripples across a still pond, it spread quietly into people's conversations, their reflections, and even their hearts. Long after the last chick waddled into the reeds with its mother, the town continued to recall that remarkable afternoon. It wasn't just about a dog or a handful of eggs anymore. It was about what the toddler had seen first, what her innocent eyes had understood before any adult dared believe, that loyalty and love often appear in places we least expect them. Children notice purity where older eyes see only risk or confusion. That is the gift of innocence. It cuts through the noise of fear, prejudice, and doubt, revealing the truth that hides in plain sight. For the townsfolk, the shepherd's vigil became more than a local curiosity. It became a lesson. They began to speak of him not simply as a stray or even just a hero, but as a living reminder that devotion has no boundaries, not of species, not of circumstance, not even of understanding. His actions asked a simple but powerful question. If a dog can stand guard over lives so different from his own, how much more should we, with all our wisdom, compassion, and choices, do for one another? Elders sitting on the benches by the lake often drew parallels to their own lives. Some remembered times when they, too, had been overlooked or underestimated, only to find strength in being steadfast. Others thought of friendships long past, bonds that had carried them through war, hardship, or loss. They saw in the shepherd's silent watch a reflection of guardianship they themselves had lived, often without recognition. A grandmother protecting her grandchildren through countless sacrifices, a neighbor keeping an eye on the lonely man down the street, a friend standing quietly by someone during illness or grief. True guardianship, they realized, doesn't always come with applause or reward. More often, it comes with patience, endurance, and a heart willing to give without counting the cost. The toddler, too young to explain such wisdom, nevertheless became the symbol of how simple it can be to recognize it. She had not recoiled in fear. She had not seen a threat. She had seen devotion, and she had reached forward with trust. That tiny gesture of her hand near the shepherd's paw had spoken more eloquently than 1,000 sermons. That trust, when pure, can draw out the best in even the most unlikely places. As the weeks passed, the dog and duck nest story took on the tone of folklore. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime tale, adding little embellishments about how the shepherd never once closed his eyes, or how the ducklings chirped in rhythm with the toddler's laughter. Teachers wove it into lessons about kindness. Clergy referenced it in sermons about love and stewardship. Even the old phone booth, once the town symbol of loyalty from another tale, was now joined by this new reminder, the image of a shepherd under the willows, keeping watch. Symbolism grew naturally. The paint-covered shepherd in one story had become a metaphor for how cruelty can disguise beauty, and now, this shepherd and his ducklings became a symbol of guardianship across boundaries. He reminded everyone that loyalty is not bound to blood or breed. It is a force that flows wherever love points it. For seniors especially, the story carried gentle wisdom. Many of them had lived long enough to see that recognition rarely comes when one is most deserving of it. Years of work, care, or quiet service often go unnoticed. And yet, as the shepherd proved, love does not need recognition to remain steady. He kept his vigil not for applause, not for food, not for praise. He did it because something deep within him knew it was right. In that silent loyalty was the purest form of love. The elders would nod knowingly when they spoke of him. That's what it means to be faithful. Faithful to duty. Faithful to family. Faithful to what is good, even when no one else understands. Some saw in him a reflection of their own lives, where acts of guardianship had been taken for granted but had still mattered deeply. Others took comfort in remembering that the world still held such symbols, that kindness had not vanished, that devotion was not outdated. And for the younger ones, the story lit a spark. They began to look more carefully at the small things, the way a neighbor watered someone else's flowers while they were away, or how a teacher stayed late for a struggling student. Suddenly, guardianship didn't seem so grand or distant. It was present, in small gestures, everywhere. Keeper, harbor, whatever name people chose for him, became more than just a dog. He was a mirror, a living parable that taught without speaking. He was proof that sometimes it takes an animal to remind humans of the best parts of themselves. In the end, the story wasn't about a toddler or a dog or even a nest of ducklings. It was about what they revealed in everyone else, that love can cross every barrier, that devotion can appear in silence, and that even the smallest hand, reaching out with trust, can change how an entire town sees the world. The elders of the town often repeated one line when sharing the tale with visitors. True guardianship needs no reward, love itself is enough. That became the moral, simple yet eternal, wrapping itself around hearts like a warm shawl. And so, under the willows where the ducks still paddled and children still played, people remembered. They remembered the toddler's wonder, the shepherd's loyalty, and the way a fragile nest had drawn an entire community closer to one another. As the final light of day brushed gold across the pond, families walking home often whispered the story again, as though keeping it alive was a duty they, too, had inherited. And always, at the end of the retelling, came a soft, gentle reminder. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in loyalty, miracles, and second chances. The adventure ends here, but your journey is just beginning. Thank you for letting us share this story with you. If you want more stories like this, like, share, and stay tuned for what's next.